Welcome to the Kingsburg Community Church podcast, Thinking About Faith. We pray that this podcast helps you deepen your faith in God and stir some inner thoughts about the Christian life.
Hi, everyone. It's Pastor Ed, and welcome to the KCC podcast, Talking About Faith. I hope you've been enjoying the last 3 weeks as we've explored Dr. Stephen Meyer's Return of the God hypothesis. I'm kind of running out of topics. Actually, we're going to continue in the weeks to come doing some more historical podcasts. So I'm going to ask Holly Songson, who is a church historian extraordinaire, to share some of the stories of the development and growth of KCC that we're actually a part of or happened soon before Holly came to the church, and so we know about. So we're going to be sharing some of those stories just to kind of keep alive and to keep a record of the history of KCC. But beyond that, if you have ideas, theological questions, things that you've always wondered about, if there's specific things that you'd like me to cover in a 20-minute format, please let me know, because as I write scripts, once I have a topic, it's much easier to write a script for a podcast. And actually, today is our 1-year anniversary of the podcast. And the things that I thought when I started the podcast, boy, I really want to cover this thing for people. We've pretty much exhausted that. So unless you want us to go more intermittently than once a week, we're going to have to get some more information or more questions to deal with. So let me know, and we can go on with that. I still have a couple of things up my sleeve in terms of, some of the pet things that I love to talk about. So maybe we'll do some of those things as well. All right, we're going to summarize our last 3 weeks. And today we're talking about science and faith. Where do these three great discoveries of the last 100 years leave us as Christian believers? I'm going to spend most of my time reviewing the last 3 weeks because I want to hammer it home. And then I want to talk about at least two great implications for how we should live as Christians who are curious about the natural world that we live in and about the origin of life. First, Dr. Meyer said that the three remarkable discoveries of the 20th century science have actually made the idea of an intelligent designer behind the universe a lot more plausible than we thought at the end of the 19th century. In the 19th century, with Darwinism and Lyell's geological understanding, it said that we didn't need to appeal to a creator for the creations of the Grand Canyon. All we had to do was look for wind and water and time, and voila, you get the Grand Canyon. And Darwin said, well, we can do the same thing with life. If you have enough time, you can posit primordial chemical ooze that had an energy source, whether that was volcanic or lightning, and somehow very basic life forms, some bacteria started to be alive, and then it developed into large, higher and higher and more complex life forms. And of course, we've all seen the Tree of Life, and that's where the idea that human beings evolved from a common ancestor with chimpanzees and the great apes and things like that, that our human ancestors kind of branched off from the apes millions of years, hundreds of thousands of years ago. We all know that theory, and the theory basically says we don't need an intervening creator. All we need is random mutation, and then he introduced an idea of natural selection, survival of the fittest. And, of course, we have a lot of questions about that. Humans obviously have larger brains than other animals. We're very well adapted, but it is interesting that we don't have fur, we don't have claws, and even compared to some of the lesser animals, we're pretty weak and defenseless, but we are social. So there's a benefit as well. And social evolutionists, talk about that as well. Purely naturalistic theories of origins, one that assumes that the universe arose solely from natural causes without any supernatural input, we've seen that they are actually grounded in their own kind of faith. Not a faith in God, but faith in what people have called metaphysical naturalism. Metaphysical means that it's beyond the physical realm. So you don't get this from studying science itself. It's a faith that is preconditioned in order to have a certain philosophical or religious stance. And it's ironic because it's been scientific materialists who've always looked at believers and said, no, you can't bring your preordained beliefs into the lab. We don't allow things that we've already decided beforehand. Because they're not empirically proven. You can't prove God in a science lab, which of course is true. But what they were not able to do is look at their own foundation and see that it was every bit as founded on faith as other faiths. And that faith was successful for almost a century, almost 100 years, in being able to include from even the idea of what the sciences were there to do, to only include the theories that limit causes to physical causes and effects in a physical universe. So if you exclude anything outside of the physical universe that we can touch and taste and see and measure, that's based on a faith that the universe is all there is. And even that faith among non-believing scientists has been eroding as other scientists are saying in answer to the challenges of probability that there must be a multiverse. There must be an infinite number of universes, and we just happen to live in the lucky universe in order to cut down on the impossible improbability of the universe in which we live. They posit this multiverse. Well, you can't empirically prove a multiverse. And so that's based on a certain type of faith. It's not Christian faith, it's not religious faith, but it's its own faith. Science defines itself in a narrow way that it excludes non-material causes by default, and yet now they're introducing this idea of a non-material cause called the multiverse in order to overcome some of the obstacles in their way. This bias prevents fair consideration of design or purpose in nature. 3 weeks ago, we saw that the Big Bang theorizes that all matter and energy had a beginning in a boundary condition, what's called the singularity, actually before time, matter, and energy, that there was an infinite state where matter, energy, and time did not exist in a physical universe because there was no physical universe. And this is a problem if you're limiting all science to only material causes. If there is no matter and energy in your boundary condition. So how is that even possible? It's really a problem in the science of origins because, of course, as many pointed out, creation out of nothing as opposed to out of something pre-existing sounds a lot more like Genesis, and how whatever you theorize is based on faith. It can't be scientifically proven. 2 weeks ago, we saw that the exquisitely fine-tuned nature of the universe, the fact that the masses of subatomic particles to the forces of gravity, electromagnetism, the so-called cosmological constant, the strong and weak nuclear forces, and even the ratio of matter to antimatter, these things all have to be perfectly dialed in order for life to be possible. And the odds against these constants appearing randomly are overwhelming. The great astrophysicist Fred Hoyle, who is not a believer, when he looked at all of the constants, the constants of physics that had to be just so in order to produce this universe, he said, a common sense interpretation of the facts suggests that a super intellect has monkeyed with physics as well as chemistry and biology, and that there are no blind forces worth speaking about in nature. So he actually, because he wasn't going to believe in a God, he thought maybe a super intelligent space alien came and dialed in the universe. Where did that come from? He doesn't say. Maybe there's something that the universe was seeded with the possibility of life, and we just haven't discovered how that happened before. Again, there's no proof of this other than the universe exists as we know it. So because of that, it's a faith statement. Finally, last week, we looked at the DNA molecule, which carries a program for building life. We said it's like a 3D program for 3D printing that's information rich. You have to have a program. If you're making a complex piece of machinery on a 3D printer, you have to have a very exact program. And if you mess up any of the parameters, the part's not going to work. And so you have to be, it has to have excruciatingly precise programming, and every step has to follow the next. If anything is out of order, the thing is just not going to work. And we said that the DNA molecule in many ways is like that kind of programming. And the nature of this useful information in the DNA molecule, the only source we know of complex information is a designing intelligence. Think about the 3.2 chromosome base pairs that are in your DNA, and the fact that when you were in your mother's womb, when you were just a fertilized egg, all of that information in your 3.2 billion base pairs of DNA were already there. And that DNA sequence in that fertilized egg was unique in all of creation, and it had the instructions to differentiate as you were developing in your mother's womb, that some of the cells were going to turn into liver cells, and some were going to turn into brain cells. Some were going to start forming these little clumps that were going to be photosensitive, and they were going to become your eyes. And you were only going to have 2 of those, not 4, and 2 ears, but only 1 nose, and only 1 mouth. And that some cells were going to manufacture bones, and that your heart was going to be a pump, that you have this exquisite circulatory system. And not only that, you have biochemical processes in your body. One of the most complex mechanisms in your body is the clotting system in your blood. And you know this if you ever have to take blood thinners. It's a very difficult balance even if you're taking just a half of aspirin a day, you have to really watch it, because if you cut yourself, you may not be able to stop your bleeding. That's because of this complex hemoglobin system that you have, where blood actually clots. There's platelets that rush to the place where it needs to be clotted. It's incredibly precise, and that information, we think, came from somewhere. At very least, the design theory asks the questions of naturalistic science that need to be answered, such as, how is it that chemistry comes to favor life? As far as we know, you go to other planets, there's plenty of chemistry there. There's carbon, there's oxygen, there's hydrogen, at least, there's lots of chemistry there. But how does that chemistry come to favor life? I'm going to talk, as we close this section, about two things that I think are consequences of understanding a little bit about science and faith from a Christian perspective. The first is that when we talk to people about science, when we explore science, when we study science, we should do so in a spirit of curiosity and humility. I talked a little bit last week that earlier Christians were actually afraid of science because they thought that science was going to exclude the possibility of God. And we found out, of course, that it did no such thing, that scientists in the last 100 years have been boldly and confidently Christian. And so I think we need to have humility in the claims of science, because science sometimes has to revise itself. And we don't want to be in a position of arrogantly claiming things that later turned out to be not scientifically plausible. One of the things that I've always kind of hesitated to affirm, we know that human life is unique from the Bible. We don't know that human life is the only life that exists in the universe. The Bible seems to be written for human beings living on the planet Earth. C.S. Lewis was one who thought that it was very possible that there might be alien life on other planets, that God, who could create life on one planet, could make life on other planets as well. So far, the search for extraterrestrial intelligence has come up totally empty. It's a great failure over the last 70 years. A lot of people who, again, aren't believers are saying, if there is other life in the universe, where are they? How come they haven't tried to communicate with us yet? Star Trek, you may know, answered that question by saying that those who are watching us are waiting for us to develop a warp drive. And as soon as we develop the ability to warp space and can travel interstellarly, that then they'll say, hey, we've been watching you all along. I don't know if that's how they solved the problem, but it's a problem. Where are they? So because of that, we should be humble as Christians. Please don't tell people because, you've gotten interested in this, and please go and watch YouTube videos of Dr. Meyer and the Return of the God Hypothesis and listen to him. He's so much more articulate and knows so much more than I'll ever know. But he also conducts himself with the spirit of openness and humility. He's not an arrogant sort of person. And it just frosts me when Christians make speculative claims that are hard and kind of arrogant and absolute and are subject to not being true. It always brings to mind people who make the prediction that Jesus is coming again, like next Thursday or something like that. And Thursday comes and he doesn't come, and nobody, I guess politely, everybody forgets that claim was made, and the overconfidence with which it has been made. even when we're interpreting Scripture, it's always for us to be lean rather than lavish. If we have to do too much theorizing and suggesting, that's when we get claims that are truly outlandish and kind of undermine the credibility of the things that we must insist on as true in Scripture, like the resurrection. The last thing that I would say we should learn from this is that science and faith can get along. It's not an either or anymore. If scientists can believe in the multiverse, we can be scientists and be at the table and say, no, I think I discern the hand of a designing intelligence. One of the pioneers of the intelligent design movement was actually not a scientist. He was a law professor at Berkeley, where I went to school. His name was Philip E. Johnson. He's since died. And he was one of the first to write a book taking a second look at Darwinism and basically saying Darwinism just doesn't work anymore. And many of the things that Darwin theorized, we just simply haven't found. And his work emphasizes the need, because of that, to be open to further intellectual inquiry, and that the inability of people to question Darwin showed closed-mindedness, narrow-mindedness, and that there was prior religious faith on their part against anything that was non-material. And he argued that dissent from Darwinism should not be dismissed as just a bunch of lunatic religious fringe people, but that there were good scientific reasons to doubt Darwinism. Most mainstream scientists largely rejected Johnson's critiques, and of course they still do, but his legal and philosophical approach sparked renewed public debate about the boundaries of science, and that's what we've been talking about. When science says, no, we only admit naturalistic causes, well, then you've ruled out there ever being an argument for designing intelligence. So now we can talk about the boundaries of science, the role of metaphysics, like the multiverse or God, and the assumptions underlying evolutionary theory when it comes to abiotic evolution, that chemicals that are not alive can give rise to life. During a conversation with a journalist, Terry Mattingly, Johnson reflected on how debates about evolution were often framed to shut down dissent. But rather than responding with hostility, he leaned into his legal training and his Christian convictions. He used to go to the church I used to go to, First Pres Berkeley. His Christian convictions to engage opponents with civility and curiosity. He said, as a student of legal argument, I know that how you state questions almost always determines the answers that you get. That insight shaped his approach, not to win arguments by force, but to reframe the conversations in ways that invited genuine dialogue. I heard a story about how he actually sponsored a colloquium at UC Berkeley when he was a professor there that invited leading scientists who were evolutionary theorists and studied cosmology, the origins of the universe. And he brought others who were debaters who had questions that were in the beginning of the early intelligence design movement. And after the debates were done, and all the papers were read, he invited everyone up to his house for dinner. And these people he had been debating with and disagreeing with and what have you, just had a marvelous time. And everyone, even if they thought he was really, really wrong, commented about what a wonderful person he was, how approachable, that he was brilliant, that he genuinely was curious, that he wasn't about shutting down his opponents or scoring on them. He was just a warm-hearted, loving Christian person. And when he died, many of them, even his opponents who didn't agree with him, spoke glowingly of what a fine and a wonderful and a hospitable and a kind person he was. Even those who strongly agreed with him noted that he was a gentleman in his demeanor. One of his friends, a Christian person who was a scientist, he remarked that Philip Johnson suffered fools gladly. He didn't mean that as a jab, but to show that his friend Philip was so patient and humble in debate. He never belittled his critics. He challenged them with his sharp reasoning, but also with his warm smile. It's rare to find someone who could so fiercely critique prevailing scientific paradigms while still earning respect across the aisle. And I think that Johnson's legacy is as important as the actual questions that Stephen Meyer's book brings us. Can we allow people to disagree with us without hammering them? Can we be kind and see the humanity in people who may be right? We're not talking about things that are set down in the Bible here. We're talking about, it appears to us that positing an intelligent designer actually solves a lot of the problems that is facing the evolutionary cosmologists, and that it's the easiest explanation, and usually, using the principle of Occam's razor, that the simplest explanation is the preferred explanation, that science ought to be more and more positive to allowing those who believe in intelligent design, whether or not that's a space alien or whether that's designing God, as part of the study of origins and belief in origins, and shouldn't be either ridiculed or excluded. And unfortunately, I think it's still true that if you get a name as a person who believes in intelligent design, you're going to be excluded from a lot of the labs, research institutes, just because of, frankly, because of evolutionary bigotry. And that's not a good thing. We don't like it when they do it to us, so let's not do it to them. To be warm-hearted. Think about Philip Johnson, who could invite his opponents to his house, host them, and have a warm and a welcoming smile to them. I think more people are probably going to be won to Christ by our friendliness, our love, our approachability, than being argued into the kingdom. I've never argued a person into the kingdom. I think what people like the intelligent design people do for us is it makes Christian faith possible for people who are deeply scientific people. And I think that that's a good thing. All right, I think that's enough. Next week, we'll be talking a little bit about KCC history, and I hope that Holly Sonksen will be joining me. Have a great week. Take care. Bye.